Good evening, everybody in Linz, and hello around the world. My name is Martin Rauchbauer. I'm the Austrian Tech Ambassador in Silicon Valley, and I also head our Open Austria office in San Francisco. Welcome to our panel on artificial intelligence and digital humanism, where we will explore, together with our panelists, who are both here on site, as well as virtually joining us from Europe and Silicon Valley, what it means to be a digital human and possibly a digital humanist in the age of AI, where it is possible to use AI and robotics to make the world a better place by putting societal goals and human well-being at the core of tech development. However, at the same time, AI can be used and is used for surveillance, exploitation, extraction, and the violation of a whole range of human rights. We'll also take a look at what the role of interdisciplinarity in the arts, in science, in civil society, and in policy making can be in critically reflecting on new technologies, but also exploring their true potential and essence. We would love to make this panel as interactive as possible, so if you are watching us online now, you will have a chance to participate by asking questions, but also by participating in a poll. Watch out for that, as well as later during the Q&A session. So if you want to participate at the poll that we're now going to set up, Anna, our moderator, is right now posting into the swap card chat our poll question momentarily, and we will get to the poll and the results later. And there will also be a chance for the audience here at the Circles of Knowledge to ask live questions. We'll start this panel with a round of introductions whereby our panelists will give us each a short presentation of themselves and what they do. And we start with Rashin Fahandej from the United States, who is also present as an artist here at the Ars Electronica Festival. Rashin.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and for the conversations this afternoon. My name is Rashin Fahandej. I am a multidisciplinary artist, a filmmaker, and a civic designer. I also teach at Emerson College in the space of emerging and interactive media. My practice sits at the juncture of art, technology, and social justice, and I use poetic and immersive storytelling as a critical inquiry and lens to look at systemic injustices and inequalities, and to sort of collectively envision a different world. So one of the main inquiries in my practice is how the processes that we engage could be redesigned and rethink in a way that they embody some of the goals and some of the visions that we have for our society. So community co-creation and centering on access and equity is central to my practice. There is a 2-minute introduction. I have an exhibit here. So the process of my work engage 80% of my time and energy, but the work manifests itself in physical or virtual installations. The work at Ars Electronica is called A Father's Lullaby. You can see about a 2 minutes of introduction to that.
Brown-skinned girl, stay home and mind, baby. I'm going away on a sailing boat, and if I don't come back, stay home and mind, baby.
She's standing right in front of you, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. Well, when I first got sentenced, I was sentenced to 360 months, which is 30 years. My 28-year-old son now, he was 7 years old. And twins, they were 45 days old. Now, I've just been released a few months ago. They're 21 now.
Like something dissolves in water. Like something dissolves in water. Dissolves in water. Place where their lullabies like transcend, dissolves in rattling bones and earthly side thing dissolves in water.
It's an incredible experience to watch this Father's Lullaby that is also present here at the festival. And I do want to mention that Rashin is also the recipient of the Ars Electronica Festival Award of Distinction in Digital Musics and Sound Art of this year. Rashin, one follow-up question to the installation and how it relates to our topic here, digital humanism. So one element I think you mentioned that in your work it's about social injustice and systemic injustice. I think when I think of this project in particular, there's also a heavy focus on the humanity of these people and their dignity. And so I was wondering in what way new technologies play a role for you to emphasize that, and how you relate to digital humanism in general.
Mm-hmm. So maybe for those audiences who don't know the work, this piece is about the impact of mass incarceration on children and families and lower-income communities and color, particularly in the United States. It is about othering and otherness. So I think in that sense, it's quite universal, this issue in different capacity in different countries. And the focus is on childhood memories and collecting lullabies from fathers who have been incarcerated, as well as the community at large. So in terms of the humanity and dignity, one thing that I believe is that we are, the way that we treat each other is a mirror reflection of who we are. So in that way, when we treat others less than ourselves, or the way that we organize society that is based on exploitation of one another, and is based on individualism and the benefit of that, not on the collective and everybody's inclusion. That shows who we are, and that shows our philosophy of life. So for me, this project is really kind of reversing that, and is an ask to really kind of truly look at ourselves and look at ourselves through the lens of love and intimacy, and it's a hope to shift that philosophy. That, if we look at not long ago, right? If we look at lynching time, if we look at in Europe the way that we were punishing, the way, if we look back at those images, what do we think about the dignity of those people in those pictures when somebody was hanged? When do we look at the dignity of people when we look at the news now in what's happening in Afghanistan? So that's a mirror reflection of who we are at the time. And I really would like to see that change. and I think that's why I'm focusing. It's really critical and a challenging issue to address, but I use all the devices possible to bring you close to this issue, not from the lens of the other, not from sitting comfortable and thinking that this is somebody else's issue, but really coming close to it and have a lot of ask for you. So for example, when you come to this installation, you don't know who's incarcerated and who's not, because it's a community at large. One face you could assume that they are incarcerated community, but they could not. So there are a range of different people in this space, but then when you encounter those stories, is the technology that is helping me sort of bringing that poetry and bringing that enough distance that it brings you closer to that issue. So for example, the touch panels that you saw, that's where you really interact with the stories of fathers who have been incarcerated. They talk about intimately about their stories of childhood, their mother, their children, and what they feel. And it's very beautiful, intimate, and powerful space. But you don't see them, and you could come to the installation and totally miss that aspect if you're not inquiring enough, if you're not curious enough to engage. But also when you engage, the touch panels are made from like scratch, and sort of it was with this idea that if you're witnessing, there is a light on you and other people witness you witnessing. So you have to hold on to your touch in order to experience the voices. Or what you saw here, it's a volumetric filmmaking. So when in the visual sense, you have that moment that you're encountering the formerly incarcerated father, you don't have access to his image fully. You cannot fully grasp him. And I'm really mindful of the colonial, time and the way that we have this desire to feel ownership over the images of others. And the technology is really helping me to take it to a space that it makes me comfortable addressing these stories.
And I think this is going to be a bit our theme, right? How is technology bringing us closer or further away from our humanity? And I think this is a wonderful example of how technology is helping us getting closer. And I would like to now move on to our next panelist, who is looking at digital humanism from a different angle, and that's the angle of human rights. Jillian York, welcome to the panel, and looking forward to your introduction and your presentation.
Thank you. May I have the clicker? Thanks. Yeah, so hi, my name is Jillian York. Thank you so much for having me today. My work is actually not entirely focused on AI. The work that I do is, I come from an activist background. I'm a sociologist, and I've been working for quite some time on free expression on the internet, and specifically came to this by looking at the ways in which states were censoring a variety of different material online. But over the years, as we've seen Silicon Valley corporations kind of take a central role in creating the spaces where we interact online, I became more and more interested in the ways in which they then control our privacy, our speech, our expression. And so when it comes to AI, the reason where that plays in here is in the ways in which it is used in the practice of content moderation. So centralized content moderation is the means by which these companies police the spaces where we participate in conversations. Some of that is perhaps good, a lot of it is not good, but AI has taken a really kind of front and center role, and often at a pace of development that is not really in line with the pace of society and the ways in which we would like to see these things work. So I'll just get into the presentation. I think I kind of forgot to talk about where I sit in the world. So I'm based in Berlin. I work for an organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I also teach at the College of Europe in Netherlands in Warsaw. So this is just, Sarah T. Roberts is an incredible researcher who kind of coined the term centralized content moderation. And she looks at the labor aspect, but also the manner in which the tools that are used in this practice are programmed. So the AI tools are a blunt instrument. They can easily function at scale in a way that humans cannot, but with the terrible downside of being overly broad and yielding hits, unable to make fine or nuanced decisions beyond what they've been expressly programmed for. And the reason that I chose this quote, there's obviously a lot of issues in having humans do this work. Policing historically has always been a problematic practice. And what we're seeing in the ways in which content moderation utilized humans is that these humans are therefore, put in a practice of having to look at some of the very worst things online. And so in a sense, it makes sense to say, let's turn that over to machines. Let's give them that role so that we don't have to employ these people in this act of labor. But what we're seeing there, sorry, I'm in the weird position here. What we're seeing there is really that the artificial intelligence, the machine learning tools that are being used to do that bring the same or sometimes worse biases to the table as humans do. So this is one of my favorite examples. This is a tool that was created by, I think they're now called Jigsaw. They used to be called Google Ideas. It's a Google or Alphabet venture, kind of operates more like an NGO and a research institution. But they created a machine learning tool called Perspective API that was meant to identify toxicity or incivility or what have you in comment threads. And so this was meant to be used by newspapers, by publications. But in using it, what I found, it used to be available for a test run online. I think it may not be anymore. But what I found was the ways in which it was programmed, it identified things such as profanities as being severely toxic, while taking more civil speech, such as, I don't know, men are superior to women, as being perfectly acceptable. And so it would rank them based on a percentage, and you could see this in all of the examples, that's what was happening. And so there's this, there's this wonderful report by Internet Lab, a Brazilian institution, that found that, in fact, it was hampering LGBTQ speech, and specifically specific practices of speech of Brazilian drag queens who had, so I'm missing the term, who had reclaimed certain words for their own usage, words that had been previously used as slurs. And this is just one example, but we see this sort of thing all the time in the ways that AI, and sometimes humans, moderate speech. And finally, I just wanted to use my own example. I was very angry at somebody a few days ago on the internet. And Twitter is now implementing a similar practice whereby when I use a profanity, and only a profanity, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it says, "What the F is wrong with you?" It ranks that as toxic, and it asks me if I really want to say that. So I played with it a little bit, and I started putting in some really truly toxic statements about, let's say, I don't know, former dictators, authoritarian figures from the past. None of those were toxic. You can praise whomever you want, but you can't say the F word without being prompted in this way. And finally, I just can't end it without pitching my new book, which is called Silicon Values and looks at AI as well as a number of other issues around content moderation, and specifically the ways in which they harm already vulnerable and marginalized communities.
Wonderful. Maybe just as a follow-up, and again, trying to relate these examples that you put of insufficiencies of algorithms, and it's very obvious in these examples that they're insufficient and that they do not compare favorably to human decisions, even though they can be mistaken as well. I was wondering if our framework of looking at our rights traditionally, before these new digital tools such as AI came about, whether this framework of human rights is actually sufficient to deal with the kind of problems that we're looking at in the online space.
Yeah, I think in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. I think it's actually becoming more and more complicated, because this is the first time in human history that we have the ability for people from everywhere in the world, from different backgrounds, cultures, and understandings, to be able to all kind of come together in one place and yell at each other all day on social media platforms. And so I do, by and large, believe that our human rights frameworks are not perfect, but the best systems that we have, and certainly the most multicultural and collaborative systems, or frameworks that we have. And yet at the same time, I think that there are things such as disinformation that are challenged by the existing ways that we think about freedom of expression, for example. So Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the ICCPR allows for certain limitations around public health, around certain hateful incitement, and the most problematic one, in my opinion, morality. But it does not allow us to restrict things like disinformation. And the other troubling thing, of course, is that a lot of the disinformation and propaganda that we see out in the world comes from state figures and state actors in the first place, which makes it so much more challenging to try to create a system of whatever you want to call it. I call it policing, and especially one of global policing that ends up, advantaging the citizens and not the states.
And so we have kind of this double problem that the international human rights framework is under attack in and of itself, both offline and online, and that's some of the work we're dealing with in tech diplomacy in Silicon Valley. And at the same time, we also see that when we try to do something domestically, it might have a completely different meaning internationally, which is what you were saying. So let's go now to a different aspect of digital humanism, and I would like to welcome Stephen Rasper, who is a cultural ambassador, if I may say so, of a very interesting institution that I've personally had the privilege to attend to, Burning Man, a festival that for the past 2 years could not take place in Black Rock City in Nevada due to the global pandemic and had to go virtual. And I think that experience, which is very recent, I think Burning Man happened just a few days ago in the multiverse, is very interesting, forced by the global pandemic. And I would like to know a little bit about that experience, because you're also a cultural advisor to the virtual Burning Man as well. And tell us a little bit about that experience between the physical Burning Man, which is an interesting social experiment in itself, and the virtual one. Stephen, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that gracious introduction. I'd like to provide a little bit of a background that I think will be relevant to the conversation. So first of all, many people know Burning Man as an art event, but we're also a city of usually 80,000 citizens who co-create a temporary city annually. Burning Man project provides only the basic infrastructure as a blank canvas that then our citizens fill with the experiences and the gifts that they want to have and offer to others. So it's quite interesting as a city of art, creative community, playful experimentation, sometimes marvelous failures that result in innovation. Thousands of regional events have grown up around the world over the years and been held on these same sort of cultural grounds or experiences. And this is just some additional background. I don't think I need that. What really began as an experiment in temporary community has evolved into a year-round global cultural movement in a way. And that culture has scaled. It has jumped forms many times. And we've ended up in some ways as a kind of a cultural incubator and a place for culture to experiment. And also, at its best, I think, a culture of cultures. In recent years, I've begun thinking about our in-person event as a kind of Olympics of human expression where people bring offerings from different cultures around the world. And that is being extended really throughout the world in multiple forms. In fact, there have been many applications of our culture as a result of this kind of experimentation. They have been applied most obviously to public art, to things like urban planning, but also to disaster response, community resilience, and addressing the refugee crisis. And even to the conditions that allow for peaceful coexistence and studies on transformation, both personal and social. one of the tools that have really allowed the culture to scale and to jump into different forms and mediums are these guiding principles. I encourage you to read them online. Some of them are quite complex, and they were written to really encourage critical thought. They're not exact rules, but they, in some ways, are reflective of the culture and the ethos that burners have. And to me, they are inherently humanist at their very core. Several of them relate to encouraging the potential of individuals to reach their greatest human potential. Others apply to the role of an individual as a citizen in society. And two of them specifically reference nature and our relationship to nature. And to me, raise questions about an expansion of self. So the last 2 years, as Martin mentioned, we were not able to hold our in-person event. And we have been experimenting as a community with taking our culture online. I'd like to play the video next. So members of our community were already experimenting with how technology might enhance social connections and creativity. So we encouraged these 8 platforms to perform these kinds of experiments and offer a place for our community to gather under the theme of the multiverse in the year 2020. And then again, this year, under the theme The Great Unknown, which ran as an experiment from August 22nd to September 7th. The 2021 numbers are still coming in, but I can tell you that in 2020, we had 168,000 participants, which is double our usual participation rate. They came from over 100 countries, and 41% of them were new to our culture. So in 2021, we again really placed emphasis on this decentralized, community-driven solutions approach. Inclusion, diversity, and equity have been very important to our organization, and we were very happy to see increased accessibility. We had more elderly people attending. We had people that felt that they might be mobility challenged in having this experience, and they participated, and people that maybe could not afford the ticket or even get one were able to participate. I'm seeing new creative forms of self-expression begin to emerge. Definitely seeing shared experience online result in community building across national boundaries. In fact, one of the platforms that exists has been existing since the early 2000s and has a very well-developed community around that specific platform and their annual gatherings. Ultimately, I see these as forms for cultural expression and prototyping. And importantly, I think prototyping potential visions of the future. And we're particularly interested, I think, as an organization, as a community, in using technology in ways that enhance social and the civic potential of art and human expression. And then if we can put up the last slide, please. Do we have that one? Well, there should be a slide of the Luminous Lotus Temple. Luminous Lotus Temple, which I think is a lovely, very real example of digital humanism, because it was a place where people could remember those who have passed in recent years, including people that have passed from COVID, or they could make offerings of one kind or another in a very deeply meaningful way online, and then this digital place and ceremony of offering was digitally burnt. So I find that very interesting, and I'd like to really invite everyone that is curious about these platforms, particularly digital artists, to explore these different worlds, because many of them are continuing, and they are excellent, I think, platforms for people that want to break digital technologies and see what these things can really do in deeply human ways.
Thank you, Stephen. I also would like to mention that Burning Man is present here at the Ars Electronica Festival with a project that is going to hopefully be presented at the next real Burning Man, Schrödinger's Rat. a experiment between Austria and California, and that has a digital component as well.
And an interactive component.
And an interactive
which
component.
is kind of seminal in a lot of the art that we have, community building and interactive.
I would like to ask you one very brief question. You mentioned now a lot of the benefits that Burning Man has experienced in the virtual world. Could you just maybe also talk about one challenge, maybe, or
oh, I have quite a list. I've been kind of going through things that I love about this moment of experimentation that we find ourselves in related to AI and technology. Among the things that concern me, I am concerned about who builds these platforms, what biases are built into them, and also are they going to be just another form of commodifying information and relationships? And that's, I think, something that many people in our community worry about, that social forums should be turned into products, and that these platforms themselves that should be inherently beneficial to humanity, society, and address the great problems instead end up marketing and sales delivery devices. So that's certainly at the top of my list at the moment.
So let's now stay in the region of the US West Coast and go to Silicon Valley and welcome Agnieszka Pilat, who is an artist who is actually, I think, traveling between the US East Coast and West Coast, but who also has a very, very interesting take on technology by using traditional art. So Agnieszka, welcome to our panel. And please introduce yourself and a little bit the work you're doing with technology. I think we do not hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now we hear you, yes.
You know, technology and me, that doesn't mix very well. So yeah, hi here from San Francisco, Silicon Valley. Very glad to meet you guys. Yeah, so before I jump into what I do, I would want to open with a quote, like the first slide, if you can go to that. Because what interests me in technology is the element of heroism. And I don't see a quote coming up, my slide.
Okay, we do not see your slide right now, but now we do.
Oh, there it is. It's cut out, but they have heads, obviously. Anyway, so I wanted to start with this quote because I'm probably the most gung-ho on technology in our panel here. Perhaps too optimistic, maybe sometimes. It comes from my belief that universe is a benevolent place, and as humans, we create machines and technology as a way to really achieve our humanness, really. So what I do is I have been very blessed to visit some most amazing companies in the world, most secretive places, including Boston Dynamics for the last year and a half. What you see on the slide, of course, it's Atlas and Hercules on one side. And I think I like to bring this up because I'm an artist, I'm a visual artist, I paint. I'm classically trained as a painter, as a portrait painter. That said, when you think about art history and kind of how arc of history shows the power brokers in society, you realize that in the beginning, when you look at portraiture and painting, it's very religious, then it moves on through aristocracy, then perhaps towards the merchant class. United States, in America, we have Andy Warhol with celebrities. So these are all central figures of each era or what have you. So Soviet Russia, I'm from Poland originally. So if you go to Soviet Russia, would be, of course, working class. And I think now we are kind of in the moment of the selfie. I think we are living in a me society right now. And for me as an artist trying to look into the future and be like a compass, I think technology obviously will be the next, and it already is the power broker in society. That's why I like painting portraits of machines. And I'm going to jump to the second slide. This is just an example of my latest work. So you saw Boston Dynamics robots on the previous slide. And so why I'm doing this juxtaposition of Vitruvian Man and Boston Dynamics. I do, and again, comes from a place of great optimism. Being artist in residence at places like Boston Dynamics or Google Waymo or Adobe, I really observe an amazing amount of benevolence and curiosity and really a pretty strong moral compass. And I think every time a human wants to do something extraordinary, he builds a machine. And of course, there's some dark players in that field, but because these machines are so extremely complicated and really require an open mind, I trust that companies and people who build these new technologies, ultimately they have to have good intentions, because you need really a very strong moral compass to follow that route, but it's very difficult. I mean, they struggle with an example again, Boston Dynamics. They've been building a Spot that you might know. It's been almost 40 years. So the resilience and against the moral certainty that they are doing the right thing makes me very, very optimistic about technology.
So let's talk about the good intentions that you're ascribing to the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs at some point. But I would also like to ask you what you are achieving in your art, in the painting, or in the portrait paintings, because there you're kind of treating robots as if they were human beings, right? And you, in a kind of traditional way, with references to
Sure.
to the classical tradition of the Renaissance. What is it that you are trying to capture in those robots when you portray them, when you portray them through painting?
Sure. So I have a show just coming up actually in a couple of weeks here in the Valley, and I named it Renaissance 2.0. And it's a reflection of not just individuals who really value the mind, which is what changed history of the world with Renaissance. The mind became so important, and of course individual rights also. And I do see the same parallel what's happening now in the Valley. So the technology changes our lives in the same way as Renaissance changed our lives forever, and like the world was never the same place. So when I paint a machine, I look at them really, I love the beauty in them, and I think the beauty of the machine reflects their honesty, because they have to operate in a physical environment. That's why I like robots a lot. So to act, to be capable of actions in the world, they have to respect the laws of physics, and they have to respect I guess, yeah, the loss of physics. So I think they're very authentic, and and it saddens me when people actually throw together social media and technology. I think there are two different things, and social media uses technology, but I think pure technology is just about curiosity and using human mind to do the fullest, and that's always, in the long term, gives positive results. So I kind of pay tribute to these machines because I think they are the next generation of my patrons, perhaps, in art. So I look at them as the hypothetical buyers of my art of the future. And I look also, what I built in my mind is a museum of the future. Then if, with AI growing the way it's growing, I see AI coming and looking at my portraits of the machines in this, like as if they were their ancestors, in the same way. When we go to a museum, to a Louvre or what have you, we look at pictures, paintings of aristocracy and think, okay, these are our ancestors.
Let's stay at this relationship between human beings and robots and welcome our next panelist, who's also Agnieszka Wykowska. You're joining us from Genova in Italy, and you are a scientist dealing with the relationship between man and robots. And I think this is a fascinating take on this relationship. And please introduce a little bit yourself and this work and this relationship that we've, in some ways, made as an example of finding humanity in the machine.
Hello, thank you very much. Hi from Italy. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Agnieszka, for the great optimism. I'm also very optimistic about technology and what we create with technology. So yes, I'm a scientist. I'm actually a cognitive neuroscientist by training. I'm interested in brains, as you can see from my background, both human brains and mechanical brains as well. So to speak. I work at the Italian Institute of Technology, so I work a lot with roboticists who actually develop robots, humanoid robots, specifically is of my great interest. And I work on human-robot interaction from the human side, because my background is cognitive neuroscience. So I'm interested in how does the human brain process signals that are displayed by robots. Do humans perceive them actually as social entities, especially when they display social signals? So the kind of human-centered technology is at the very core of my work. And what I wanted to maybe point out here is that we, in our team, I lead the team that name is Social Cognition and Human-Robot Interaction at the Italian Institute of Technology. And the team is interested in kind of three main topics. One is a project that is actually funded by the European Research Council. The title is Intentional Stance for Social Attunement. And here what we are interested in is whether and under which conditions humans actually adopt intentional stance towards robots, meaning when do they attribute intentionality to robots? So if you think about explaining behaviors of other humans, when we look at other humans, observe other humans, we explain their behaviors, their actions all the time with reference to mental states. So when I see someone grasping a glass of water, I interpret this behavior as this person wanted to drink and believed that water would ease their thirst. Wanting, believing, these are mental states. Now, the question is whether we also attribute these kind of mental states to machines. Because in theory, because they're machines and they are just artifacts, we should adopt the so-called design stance. So just as we think about coffee machine, it stopped pouring coffee in my mug, not because it wanted to stop, but because it was designed to stop. And robots are somewhere in between, especially humanoid robots. They resemble humans, they look like humans, and they maybe behave like humans. So we might be inclined to adopting intentional stance towards them. But then the question is when, under what conditions we do. So that's one line of research. Another one is social attunement between humans and robots. And social attunement is it's an umbrella concept that sort of subsumes all sorts of mechanisms that we use on a day-to-day basis with other humans when we interact. And very many of them are very implicit. So we look into each other's eyes, we establish this gaze contact, for example, when we want to interact with others, but then we're not very much aware of deploying this mechanism. And for example, how long do we look at each other? We don't know, because these mechanisms happen very automatically. And now what is of interest for us is whether these mechanisms also happen when we interact with humanoid robots. And this is quite important for application areas, because one third main line of research in our team is robots for healthcare. And here we're specifically interested in robot-assisted training of social skills for children diagnosed with autism. And that is because children with autism open up to robots. They are very happy to interact with robots most of the time. And we can use this opportunity to actually help them in training social skills. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that actually we're training social skills so that the robots are behaving in a kind of socially attuned way. So when I talk about attunement and those mechanisms of social cognition, I wanted to show you an example of like what sort of mechanisms we're targeting in this video. So you see, this is a very simple interaction of passing an object to one another, but there's so much happening. There are pointing gestures, there's gaze, there is some sort of a joint action cooperation that needs to be very well timed. And again, our brains employ a lot of mechanisms to make this work. And then there's also emotional synchronization that is really, really important in human-robot interaction, in human-human, but also in human-robot interaction.
Thank you. One question that has fascinated me about your research is what makes robots better at understanding human beings when we use them in a research project? Why is it better to work with robots in order to understand human psychology rather than working with other human beings?
Thank you for the question. Great question. Yes, we use robots in our research in experimental paradigms to examine actually the human cognition. And the reason why we do that is because we have an embodied presence in front of another person. So this kind of resembles a real interaction. So we can tap onto mechanisms of the brain that happen, as you saw in the video, that we need to understand when, for example, when I grasp for an object to hand it over to someone, when do I gaze at that object and when do I gaze at the other person? And what sort of mechanisms of the brain are involved in this kind of eye-hand coordination? We do this automatically, but the mechanisms that are employed in the brain are very unclear. So we need to understand those. And so using these kind of interactive protocols allows us to examine human cognition in a kind of real scenario of interaction on the one hand. On the other hand, it's much easier for us to, or not easier, technically more feasible to use robots rather than another human, because we can actually control the robot and the parameters that the robot uses to examine specific mechanisms of the human brain. Because if I need to design an experiment where, for example, the robot will need to act in a certain way with very precise timing and act over and over again with the very same type of behavior. Now, if I ask another human, even if it's a very well-trained actor, that might be very, very difficult. If I ask someone to gaze 300 milliseconds after you raised your hands to grasp, it's very hard to do. So we can control the robots to elicit certain mechanisms in the interaction partner's brain. On the one hand, on the other hand, we have an interactive protocol. So that's one way of using robots to examine human cognition. Another way is to actually build computational models of the human cognitive mechanisms again. And those models can then be implemented on the robot in order to understand what actually are we looking at. And this is the kind of like approach of understanding through building. Once we build a model, once we see if a robot actually behaves in a certain way, then we understand also what is behind that model.
Wonderful. I would like to now ask the panelists, but maybe we can interact here with our audiences, because we put a poll into our Swapcard chat function, and we asked the question, you know, what we actually mean and understand when we talk about digital humanism. What kind of ideas and concepts do we find most relevant for this? It's a very broad concept. In diplomacy, when we talk about digital humanism, we talk about this being a response to fears and hopes of our citizens regarding the digital transformation based on human rights and humanistic values. But it's a very, very broad concept. So I don't know if we have any results of this poll. What ideas and concepts do you find most relevant for achieving, for furthering our humanity? And I'm looking at if we do have some results there. Maybe they're still coming in, but this is a way for you to tell us what you think is important. Maybe I'll turn the question to our panel. our panel and asking Rashin, if we want to further our humanity, what role does technology play there for you?
I consider technology as an extension of our mind and bodies, and it's definitely has been already dominant in the way that we interact as a human being, or even like think, judge, explore, imagine. So I don't see it as something that is happening in the future, but it's something that we are already living within it. And one question that is like very interesting is that, as human beings, we are the product of the system that we are critiquing. So it's very difficult to simultaneously leave a situation and create a situation and simultaneously critique it. But that's where the importance and the criticality comes, that and there are many people that they are doing it. So one aspect of I want to come back to what Agnieszka mentioned in terms of that sort of like optimism, right, of science and technology. And it is like it's a beautiful, wonderful space. It's the space of creativity. It's the space of thinking about future, other ways that we could engage. But then I want to come back to the question that teven was raising, is that who is making these at the moment? Who is at the table that exclusively think about what the technology would look like and what they do? And those are, and then, I think the question of who's using it for me is just too old. Thinking about inclusion in consumption is just too old of a story. Like, it's about who is at the table of making and creating and envisioning. And I think where the problem lies in majority of the spaces is, okay, the first, like going back to the Genesis, right? So the main question is that in the space of creation, the table is very homogeneous, therefore single, like I have no doubt of intentionality, of good, intentionality of people, but then when there is a singularity in the lens and the perception, and we don't have a prism of wide space of having many different point of views and experiences, and when we talk about women and minorities and all of that aspect at the table, there is inevitable that we create something that it could not be as a wholesome that it could be. It could not reach its full potential. It's like flying with one wing or looking through a single eye. Yes, you are looking, and you have all the good intention. But I think so that's a critical moment, right? But then also another aspect of it is that how do we incorporate this technology? We look at anything that we use at the moment, our cars, our airplane, and so the way that it's incorporated, it really, the way that we use that technology, the way we regulate that technology, it's really kind of shaping our humanity. So can we imagine cars without stop signs and speed limits? But also, can we imagine a world, for example, in the United States that I live in now, is that a world that could have been designed, a city that it could have been designed differently, that we are not driving single cars, like one individual in every car, and we are destroying the environment. So it is all about that. So it comes about the genesis and the making, the decision making, and for me it's like really about the question of inclusion, and then it comes about policy, who's making policy, And then, the core of that, it goes to the philosophy that I was talking about at the beginning. So if our philosophy of life as a human being in this society is to create something that we all benefit, the resources are a lot, like it's abundant, right? The resources is abundant. It's about how we are really kind of treating each other in a society. And is it based on exploitation? Based on, I'll leave it at that, because all of that aspect, whether we are thinking about environment, when we are thinking about human, when we are thinking about the species, like it's all about, is it exploitation or is it harmony? And is it coexistence in a beautiful, productive way? Because if we go other ways, it's like, again, inevitable. We see the result now. We look at our world, and we look at what we are doing now. And if we don't take that mirror like strongly, and really kind of think about all of these aspects of who's making them, how are we making laws and policies, the vision for our world, that sort of beautiful scientific explorations is incredible, but also could be atomic bomb that destroys a city fully.
So if we take this structure
I want to jump
a little
in
bit,
if I could.
okay,
Actually.
just maybe reacting to this and structuring it a little bit. So you're saying intentionality is important, but it's just one aspect in the development of technologies, and there of course are also unintended consequences, consequences that were not intended with the good intentions. And then there's of course the question of not only what do people want, but who are they, and in what way are they representative, and who is not represented in the development of technologies. And then you're saying the purpose, the what is it for, what kind of model of life and attitude towards life does this represent? So in this framework, I would like to ask everybody in the panel to chime in. What do you think does technology do at the moment, and what should it do in order to best further our humanity? But Agnieszka, Pilat, you wanted to chime in.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be brief. I do think that as much as we are trying to really attach a lot of ethical decisions to technologies, I think technology ultimately is a science, and we have to, I think, allow scientists to have curiosity and just follow the truth as opposed to trying to make a point. So like I have a lot of friends here in Silicon Valley. Stanford is a wonderful school, and I would not want to see these brilliant minds shackled in any way to have an agenda. So I think the spirit, that's what I love about Burning Man also, that it's spirit of curiosity and being inclusive, it's wonderful. But I think it's just an organic way of growing a community, and the good values ultimately just bubble up naturally. So I just wanted to mention that I think science basically needs freedom to really explore, and that brings risks, and there is negative consequences, some externalities that said you cannot shackle a mind. Minds have to be free to innovate.
Okay, so you're kind of also saying we have to be careful not to impose a kind of a straitjacket on the development of technologies, whatever that straitjacket is. Jillian, how do you see this question of intentionality and also access, and representation?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what's being said here. I think that there is a lot of incredible technology that does come with the best of intentions, but I'd also like to remind that it doesn't all. So, I mean, an example from this week that's not AI, and then I'll take it to AI in a moment, but Facebook has created these new glasses. You can take little pictures up, from them. Kind of a very similar concept to something that Google did 10 years ago that didn't really catch on. And I think that the people who created these probably did have the best of intentions, but I don't think they took into account the ways in which those could be used in harmful ways, to take upskirt videos of people or to surveil people, use videos against them, in places where maybe they're doing things that are not so publicly acceptable, et cetera. So I think that's one element of it. But then I also think, you know, I worry that some of the unshackled mind, as Agnieszka said, has given us technologies like surveillance, things that are utilized and are replicating the kind of problematic existing systems within our society in a techno-solutionist manner, and then being used, you know, being created often in the United States, in Europe, and then being used by those governments, but also by more authoritarian governments for even more harmful purposes than they were originally created. And so I do think that there is a need here for regulation. I think that there's also very much a need for the people in these you know, the hallowed halls of these institutions to be thinking about what happens when those technologies get into other people's hands. And to use a really concrete example from the past few weeks, technologies created in the United States for some of these purposes are now in the hands of the Taliban. And I think we can't forget things like that. A lot of these are machine learning systems utilized for surveillance. And so, yeah, I mean, that's not to say that the people creating them didn't have good intentions, but often their views are incredibly narrow about how they imagine these technologies will be used. And as you said, I think that it does matter who's at the table, because when you don't have, I mean, we've seen the statistics from a lot of these Silicon Valley companies. I can only really kind of quote off the top of my head the Google and Facebook ones, but I've seen, you know, we've seen them. A lot of them publish diversity reports, and they are still majority white. They are still majority male, majority American, and that to me is kind of what ends up exporting this set of very narrow, as I call it, Silicon values. Sorry, I know, but ends up exporting this very narrow view of the world to other places that may not share those same values or the same experiences in life.
Let's talk a little bit about these human values or humanistic values, which is another topic and is quite independent from intentions. I mean, if I look at you, Stephen, and Burning Man and its 10 principles, how important are our values at the creation of technologies, and you know, how do we need to look at them, and how do we need to frame them in order to further what is our goal, the humanity in our world?
I like that on the one hand, we have one panelist that is really arguing for the unbridled freedom that AI and these technology tools offer people. And that is what I want for every artist in the world, for example. I see these as tools for human expression. And I see them as both an extension of consciousness and a device through which we can look at our own priorities as human beings and what does humanity mean. I'm very moved, actually, by some of the research in which it's clear that there's an effort to use robots, in a way, to better understand what is important about being human. What are the attributes? And I would like there to be not a set of rules. Burning Man has never been about a dogma or sets of rules, but having a code of conduct or having some language that in a way reflects some underlying values could be very helpful in this forum, honestly. When I speak, when I really think about, when I step very far back from the details of this question, I can see that what we are doing is looking at a new kind of mirror to our own souls and to what it means to be human in this moment. And whether it's a robot, whether it's a virtual world, I think it's very important to bring the really important questions to these new mediums and tools. And I do worry about the time that we might have for either our species and others, that we should ask the big questions. We should ask, what does it mean to be, in some ways, a deeply human and powerful, as well as vulnerable creature on this planet, that, you know, to address the biggest challenges of our times, including the survival of other species on the planet. So, hey, look, I've got some members of our community that are flying to Mars and exploring new frontiers. And I support their imagination and that they can prove that anything is possible. And there's a very practical side of me that says, but what about all of the issues we have right here on Earth? So I am at odds with myself very often over this same thing of wanting the tools to be limitless so that the human imagination can be limitless, and also the practicalities of the moment and the moral imperatives, what it means to be a human being in this moment, given the challenges that we all face. And I think that something else that really has struck me so much about the world that we are living in right now and how technology can complicate that is that we have an increasing fragmentation of reality and of truth, and it gets harder and harder to agree upon. Where are we right now? Where do we really stand, and where do we want to go? And I really hope, I know that at this forum, where we have artists, scientists, and people that are exploring the areas of overlap between science, art, and spirituality, these are good and important points of intersection that in some ways can keep things in a healthy check. Sometimes it's very easy right now, I think, for everyone to further their own agenda, to use these technologies to show how bright they are as inventors, without any sense, perhaps, of what they really might do to live a good and moral life in the moment that we have together and to be connected. And I love the connective aspect of all of these tools because they show how interconnected we really are. But yes, quite a complicated mirror for any of us to be looking into and saying, who are we, where do we stand, what we're about, what are we about, and where do we want to go next as a species?
So it's about the kind of questions we need to ask as well. I would also like to refer to a topic that has come up a lot, and that's the role of the arts in creating technologies, and this immense creativity and this immense potential that artists often see in technologies, and also the criticality, the critical mindset they bring along. I would like to know how this works in practice, and I would like to ask Agnieszka Wykowska, because you work with artists, right, in your research and in your human-robot interaction, and tell us a little bit about that, element of artistic research, artistic interdisciplinarity, and what it actually brings to the table.
Thank you. Yes, we have, just started to work with an artist who was actually having her residency in our lab. And I find it extremely fascinating to have this interdisciplinary dialogue because it's a completely different mindset for us, scientists a person coming from the arts world, has a completely different way of looking at things, asking questions, and I think it's the questions that you mentioned, Stephen, that are so interesting to discuss actually with people from other disciplines. Artists on the one hand, philosophers, people from humanities. And I have gone through a long path of interdisciplinary research, on the one hand, having to work with roboticists, who are also people from very different background than mine. On the other hand, also with people from humanities. And I find it extremely enriching because very often we wouldn't ask the questions. So one of the main questions that I mentioned in earlier that we're investigating is the aspect of intentional stance. This is a philosophical question. And limiting ourselves to just scientific, let's say, literature and being embedded in kind of very unified environments probably wouldn't elicit asking us this kind of question. So I find it extremely enriching, and I enjoy a lot the dialogues. I enjoy the way artists also, when interacting with robots, they look at robots also as a human creation, as Agnieszka was mentioning. And I think this is a very important aspect, both from arts, but also from psychology perspective. So that's a great experience that we can have, and great opportunity to actually discuss with art. I just wanted to maybe comment on the earlier topic of academic freedom for scientists and coming up with ideas for inventions. And I, of course, as a scientist, couldn't agree more. And absolutely great point about not limiting scientists' freedoms and curiosity. Curiosity-driven research is extremely important. Curiosity-driven research cannot be tailored to specific agendas. It has to be coming completely bottom-up from just scientists. And of course, there are risks that the technology and science that scientists are developing will be misused in some way. That's why we need to make sure that policymakers keep an eye on how the technology is used later on. But it's always a matter also of looking at the benefits. And we talked a lot about risks, but please keep in mind that there's also so many benefits that each technological and scientific invention has brought to humanity. And when we eventually should always look at the risk and benefits table and not just at the risk part of the table.
Going back to this question of the potential impact of artists in the development of technologies, there's so many other artists here on the panel, and also, of course, Jillian, what are your thoughts on this? Maybe I ask Agnieszka Pilat, you worked also in the development of technologies, you worked with Boston Robotics. What do you think is the potential of an artist in the development of new technologies?
Well, first of all, I saw, again, curiosity is #1 word for me. And that's, again, Stephen, for Burning Man, I think curiosity. And #2, that's what made Silicon Valley so successful. So I think the amount of resources they have, both in, I mean, economically, of course, they are very well paid, and they have job security. I think it really allows them to be, to have that spirit of curiosity. But going back, I think, so what I witness when I go to these companies, what engineers really want and look for is really that moral acknowledgement. We are making the world a better place. And it's very important to them. Again, they're very well paid, they have phenomenal job, they have, I mean, their life is amazing, and they don't have a worry in the world. But what they're missing is they're not really, that's why many companies in Silicon Valley are really mission driven. And so what they're looking for is that moral acknowledgement of what they are doing. And I think today, what I love about the Valley, and that's why I'm such a big champion of the Valley and of the machine, is the respect for human mind. Again, and I think it's just giving lots of agency to engineers and to people, as opposed to, again, having an agenda. They're just the amount of freedom, and they will stay there all day long working because they're so fascinated. They're like kids. It's like a God's laboratory, what they're doing. So for me, being at Boston Dynamics, for example, and seeing Atlas get up, and again, knowing in my back, in the back of my head, that I knew how many years it took them, and seeing the joy. They're like kids. They're like car mechanics. They're like, it's just so benevolent, beautiful place. So I think for them I come and I show them what they are doing from the humanistic perspective, and they want to be part of history, and they want to be part of culture. And ultimately, again, they want to make the world a better place, and they deserve to be acknowledged for it. So that is my mission.
All right. Now, we have the results of the poll, and this is what our audience thinks is relevant for digital humanism. The one item that gets the most votes is digital human rights as a pillar of digital humanism, but then also inclusion and social responsibility, and then also human autonomy, human-centric design, diversity, technology for good, ethical design, and that's a little bit it. So I would like to now pass on to the audience and the questions. If you have any questions here, please raise your hand. We have a lot of questions coming from our online audiences, and the first one I would like to address to Jillian. AI seems to be shrouded in different mythologies. Jillian, as a writer yourself, do you think this is entirely detrimental to advancing AI in a more humanistic, more inclusive direction, or do we just have to develop a narrative that works in humanism's favor?
Oh, it's a wonderful question. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, for folks who work in the space that I work in, AI does have a lot of negative connotations because we're studying things like its use for policing, its use for facial recognition, surveillance technologies, things that, you know, I may actually rather see put back in the box. And yet at the same time, there are, I mean, being here these past couple of days, I'm seeing all of these beautiful artistic uses of AI. I played the game earlier where you got to, for the audience at home, got to forage for mushrooms using an AI identification tool. Unfortunately, I think I poisoned myself virtually, but nevertheless, really cool and innovative uses. And so I do think that we need to do a couple of things. One is absolutely to, I'm not sure if mythology is the term I would use, but I'll go with it, create a humanistic mythology around AI and its possibilities. But I think that for me, the other one is that we do need to think outside of existing frameworks. The frameworks that we've created as societies for many things are not working for us right now. Policing is not working, for example, and yet we're seeing the exact same modalities being brought into digital and online spaces, into technology, into facial and gait and tattoo recognition. And so facial recognition, for an example, might have some wonderful uses. I know that it can be very useful in a number of different contexts outside of policing, and yet that's one example where I would say I'm not sure that the benefits do outweigh the vast harms of its use on some of the most vulnerable people in society. And so, yeah, I guess to conclude there, I would like to see us re-envision AI, think about it in terms of the vast possibilities of imagination and art rather than replicating existing harms from society.
So we need new frameworks. This question on mythology was by Anna, by the way, and the next question is by Rebecca for Agnieszka. Pilat. You're really lucky to be able to observe and get insight in such a cutting-edge tech company like Boston Dynamics. So my question is, what is your opinion on the relations between military and AI and robotics? How does this relate to digital humanism? How can you expect that the pure goal is curiosity to explore, since there is a link to developing this tech for warfare? And what is your opinion on it as a female artist, Agnieszka?
It's a great question. I know a lot of people have concerns about this, and I've been personally attacked by doing stuff with Boston Dynamics because we know they came from DARPA. We know that it was a military project with huge amounts of grants. I know that some people are very scared of the robots. Again, my experience, and it's interesting being a female artist also in Silicon Valley because there's so much about the bro culture, and I understand all that. Me personally, I've been always really treated with just great respect. When it comes to Boston Dynamics specifically, I think, I mean, it's a cop-out, but, you know, a knife is a knife, and you can, you know, cut someone a piece of cake and give them wonderful cake, and you can stab a person, right? So I do think in that terms, I'm coming back to the same theme. I think technology is morally neutral, and it's on us. That's why it is our obligation to get involved and to be part of the conversation. And also not attack, because I think that also we saw politically, actually, in our country, in America, if you attack your enemies, instead of trying to be curious and understand them, make a dialogue, people just, you know, go into their bubbles. So as an artist, I'm very grateful that I get to go into these companies. And I have no people I've worked with, I've never seen any bad intentions. And, you know, weapons are part of humanity. We have the dark part in us. And yeah, I understand the fears around it. But for me, I mean, I got so connected to the robots, especially to Spouts. I got very connected to them. I know what number they were, and when they were sent out in the world, I almost felt like heartbroken because we imbue them whatever our intention is. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I've been attacked on this subject many times, and I sometimes feel it uncomfortable because I think it's a great company.
So the next question is focusing on a central concept of humanism, on human autonomy, and it's directed to Agnieszka Wykowska. Do you think programming a robot to simulate consent or freedom to obey commands might help humans see them better as social entities. Not saying it's a good idea, but just wondering if the aspect of consent or free decisions plays a role in simulating intention.
Very interesting question. Thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't know. I guess it's an empirical question to be asked, actually, and that's an experiment we can run in the lab and see whether that would do something to attribution of intentionality. I know of some studies where a robot was asking a person not to turn it off, so in a sense, not consenting to being turned off, and that indeed played a huge role in how people approach the robot, and it has, with attribution of intentionality, that definitely worked. Autonomy, I think, is a very, very interesting aspect in terms of human-robot collaboration in general. And here I can, ranging from humanoid robots, as I was presenting, to autonomous cars, there are very, very many important and interesting questions that need to be asked there about sense of agency, for example, on the human side. So how much autonomy does a robot need to have to preserve still sense of agency on the human side? So sense of control of a, let's say, joint action. When I'm driving a car, at some point, I lose control, in a sense, over what's happening. And of course, that's something we wouldn't want to be happening, because eventually then, if the person, the driver, needs to intervene, maybe they're not there. So I think it's a very, very important, interesting question. And I think we definitely empirically need to examine it. For now, I think it's still a long way for the robots to really, in reality, be completely autonomous. So we can only kind of simulate the autonomy by, for example, explaining to participants that, well, this robot is or isn't autonomous. But to have really autonomous robots and examine what does that mean for humans is a thing of future, but it's a very, very interesting question.
Next question is to Rashin, again from Anna. What is the role of the artist in times of crisis, just like the current one, the global pandemic, but not only the current health crisis, but also the massive exacerbations of other crises in its wake? How's this impacted artists?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe if I want to put it in one word, this sort of speculative thinking, and you know, I mentioned earlier that, you know, how we are all as a human the product of the system that we are critiquing, and I think that sort of creative thinking and imaginative thinking would allow like avenues and spaces for really breaking away from where you are, and they are kind of wings that it would maybe like allow you to come with a little bit more higher and look up and bring that creative criticality in. And the other aspect of it is that, like, I am a firm believer in intersectionality, because I think, you know, one of the things that I was mentioning about the table, mm-hmm. and more perspective at the table is not only about race or, you know, gender or experiences. It's also about different perspective and professional kind of point of the professionality that we have, or that lenses that we bring into the space. So I think science would benefit a lot, like, from thinking about bringing, you know, aspect of anthropologies, you know, artists, and so there should be spaces, there should be incubations, places that would allow for more of imaginative thinking that is intersectional, that it brings the perspectives together. So, for example, if I go back to my own experience, I started this project about 5 years ago as an artist in residence in his mayor's office in Boston. So the whole idea was that to embed artists within the different departments to really kind of bring and look at the issues and challenges that that department was looking into through a new lens, just allowing like a new perspective to come to that space. And that in itself, I think that there is an expansion that is happening. And it was really incredible because I think it was not only for me as an artist, like it gives me a new perspective, right? Like into that space, into that working system, into that structure, into the systemic ways that things were set up. But also it allowed a much more sort of nuanced way of looking at things. So for example, I was following police department for a lot of time, city development, women advancement. So I think it is really important to sort of embed and allow incubation. And I think another thing that I want to say is that a lot of time we talked about like focus lens or narrow lens, but also binaries. A lot of time I think binaries could be disrupted through this sort of intersectional approach and look and engagement. And I believe things could happen from that collective wisdom that we cannot imagine if we allow for more of that to happen. So maybe I'll leave it at that.
You is bringing in another question, and whoever would like to take it from the panel, the concept, which is a very human concept of vulnerability. In AI art, AI, which learns from humans, can always be counted on to generate art that is more human than humans themselves, Yu says. It is because humans are fallible. Humans can make mistakes. Humans can be corrupted, can despair, can act irrationally at times, being influenced by humanity's vulnerabilities. My question is, does AI have any vulnerability? I do not mean AI's bias due to training data set nor algorithms errors. I mean, on a higher level, does AI have vulnerabilities like humans do? Is it fallible? And I would add, should it be? Maybe Agnieszka Wykowska, would you like to take that question?
It's a very interesting question. I think one needs to examine that in the context of also something that exists in the field is the robots' rights. Should robots have rights, and how should we think about violence, cruelty towards robots, and then vulnerability, of course, is as part of, I think, that topic. I think there have been episodes of humans, actually this was quite really interesting phenomenon, of humans being very, very brutal towards robots. One robot was actually, that was a sociological experiment, a hitchhiker robot that was traveling the US, and it was found beheaded and treated super cruel, in a cruel way, but in a funny way, because the violent behaviors were performed in a way that one would be very, very violent towards another human. Because for a robot, I mean, to be beheaded, I mean, one can cut cables, right? It doesn't need to be in such a awful, cruel way. So I wonder what that really means. Again, what does this tell us about humanity? Why do we want to treat robots like that? And whether we want to think about robots as being vulnerable and discuss their, let's say, moral space in our societies. It's an open question that is being discussed among philosophers. I personally think that robots should be, that users should always be aware that these are just machines in the end, and they can assist us, they can help us, they can be extremely useful for us, but they are machines, and that's what it is. They're artifacts, they're our tools, and they can help us. And I think, therefore, vulnerability and tools, these two concepts don't really go together, but that's just my personal opinion on how robots should be, let's say, told to, like, what robots are. People should always keep in mind that these are just tools.
We're coming towards an end, but I would like to ask Stephen one very short question. Given the experience that you now had with the digital Burning Man experience, are you going to keep it? Are you, you know, if let's say we return to some sort of normalcy, are you going to keep Burning Man being virtual?
Well, I think we're still learning and assessing from the experiences we've just had these last 2 years. Personally speaking, I don't know how we could ever go back to not having some kind of virtual or hybrid manifestation of the experience. So I would expect the technology would continue to play a form. I wonder sometimes about the timing. Does it all have to happen at once? Or like our regional events around the world, can they happen at different times?
So it'll be in some sort of way, it will be continued together with the virtual, with the physical Burning Man. We have only a few seconds.
I expect so.
Yeah,
I expect them to be interwoven.
We have only a few seconds left, so I would like to thank all the different perspectives we got today from Europe and Silicon Valley. Digital humanism in the digital age. I would like to thank all institutions. This is the end of AI Lab, the European Artificial Intelligence Lab conference. I would like to thank all panelists, both virtual and physically present here, to give us this broad perspective of digital humanities. And I would like to also thank the audiences here and virtual for their active participation. And I hope we somehow managed to gather some insights into what it means to be a digital human in the age of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
And thank you for hosting the very compelling panel.